Well, hang on.
All right, everybody. Tonight in Plane Traffic, I'm Lou Santiago. I'm one of the hosts of this train wreck. So just to let you guys know, but you already know I do a thing called Car Fix, Plane in Traffic, some other stuff, but that's okay. Tori, intro.
Hey everybody, I'm Tori DeBlasi from Long Island, New York, and I'm visiting Lou. We had a really good time yesterday. We'll go into that later on the show. Lou, I'm still speechless, but how you doing, Ray?
Just stop gushing. Just keep going. Just Ray, go.
Hey, all right. I'm one of the other conductors for this train wreck, Ray Guarino, Motormouth Radio, New York, and Louis Lee has passed me the torch tonight, so I'm the flame bearer. And we have a guest.
Intro him, Ray. Take it.
We have with us Mr. Michael Harding from Champion Cooling out in California, championcooling.com. Michael, pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. Actually, I think in this position I'm Greg Brady. I'm not sure, but
He moved, yeah. I was Marshall last week.
You would be Greg Brady.
Yeah, I think that's what it is,
yeah.
Excellent.
No, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure, and I've been working with Lou a little bit and talking with Tori and working with him a little, and it's just great camaraderie working with you guys, and I look forward to doing a lot more work with you guys. So we're real excited about it.
I gotta say, I was looking at your stuff today, looking at the website, and learned a lot of stuff about radiators. There's a great slew of videos up there that show Q&A and tech tips.
Right.
And I even watched the stuff that I already knew about because I like to see another take on it, which I made a list of questions so we can
Great. All right. Yeah. I hope I do well. Well, there's a lot of misconceptions, and one of the things that I always like to say right up front is that we're not a solution to an overheating problem. We're not a solution to my car keeps running up to 240 degrees. Aluminum radiators don't solve overheating problems. We solve a finance problem. We have a great product, and you can run 5 or 10 degrees cooler, but a lot of times people think that, okay, well, I'm going to get aluminum radiator because I'm overheating. And it's like, you need to solve the problem first. I'd love to say that, if you're running 230 degrees, you can put an aluminum radiator in and you'll be right down at 185. But you have other problems going on that you need to solve. And we try to help people work through those. I make it anything from airflow, coolant flow, timing, too much horsepower, not enough fan, not enough radiator surface. So there's a lot to learn about this, and we try to educate our customers and the people we work with and help them solve the problems before they just jump into something.
Yeah. You
actually get a degree, a street degree in thermodynamics and fluid dynamics when you get into this stuff. I had a problem in my own car, a Pontiac that I built and put a 5-speed in it, and that was the problem. I'm driving that car on the highway, and it was running hot. And I said, I don't think the engine's turning fast enough in 5th gear to spin that water pump. So I had to go and get a high-performance flow-cooled water pump, and that helped a lot. But, again, it's like picking the problem apart systematically to find each individual, piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
There's so many things, and we've got a blog on our page where we've started doing car features for customers that have our products, and we've also started doing tech articles where I'm working with guys in the industry, asking questions. We do cooling fan relays, so we work with the guys at Ron Francis and get some quotes from them. We work with the guys at Edelbrock and CVF Racing because they make high volume or high flow water pumps and different pulley sizes. And we get a lot of people say, well, I'm overheating, so I'm going to get an overdrive water pump pulley. And it's like, no, that's good if you're driving parade routes at 3 to 5 miles per hour. But you start spinning fast like that and you got an overdrive pulley, you're going to start wearing out alternators and water pumps. So, if you look at our blog and we've got a bunch of tech articles up there, and working with these people in the industry who are the experts of the products they sell. And it's just kind of bringing it all together. There's more to it than just the radiator. And that's what we want to share with people. There's a lot of great advice out there, and we're networking with some really great companies out here.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys have that problem with thermostats. They have the wrong thermostat in the engine, or it's not a calibrated thermostat. You want to, or they take it out, and you want to keep the fluid in that radiator long enough so it can cool.
Right.
That's another biggie.
Well, that's a good point too. We just had a guy who was telling us that he was concerned because he's running 195 degrees, and we're like, well, that's perfect. And he says, yeah, but I have a 160-degree thermostat, and a lower thermostat just changes the amount of time it takes for your engine to start flowing the coolant.
Right.
But your engine's going to find its operating temperature regardless of what your thermostat is. If it's comfortable running at 195, you can put a 120-degree thermostat in there. As soon as it's 120, it's going to start flowing, and your engine's going to find it's 195 degrees. So that's a good point too. Is thermostats don't change your operating temperature; they change how long it takes for the coolant to start flowing through the radiator.
I also like to ask people, where are you checking the temperature at? Where's the sender? Where is it in the system?
Right.
Because depending where it is, you're going to get different readings. So
yeah, it's really difficult when you have some Chevy engines and your temperature reading is right off the cylinder head. You're getting a lot of residual heat from the exhaust there, and it might not be completely accurate. So we kind of try and tell people the best place to put your temperature sender, and also for your cooling fans, is to pick up the temperature below the thermostat. So you're reading the internal temperature before the thermostat opens, and right there on the intake. A lot of the problems that people have these days is they're adding electric cooling fans, they're adding EFI, and then they've got a gauge. So you don't have 3 ports. So that's another thing. It's in one of our blogs. We kind of show people, ways you can get around it. Companies like Mazir, they have a spacer. It's got two ports to add another sensor or sender unit. You can also, you go to places like Lowe's or Home Depot, and you get a brass tee, and you can tee it off and add an extra sender that way. It's a lot of these older engines and these intakes, they didn't take into consideration you need 4 or 5 temperature senders on your engine now.
Yeah.
Well, but you got to remember back then they didn't need them.
Yeah.
They really didn't need them. But once you start,
no, not at
all of today's stuff, you have to make provisions for it.
Yeah.
And Chassis John wants to know, is there a water flow gallons per hour range that's best for high performance street driven engines?
It's kind of hard to get into gallons per hour because there's so many different pumps out there. I couldn't give you, honestly, I couldn't give you a number right now. I have to do a little bit of research and talk with some guys about it, because it's really, for a high performance street engine, you don't want to keep trying to flow as much coolant as you possibly can. You need the coolant to pass through the radiator and give it time to cool. So, we say look at the standard performance water pumps, and what they're rated at is usually sufficient. A lot of people are trying to go to like electric water pumps, and it's really not necessary on a street engine. They use them a lot for race. When you see a guy that's doing quarter mile and that's all he's doing is drag racing, don't try to mimic his engine for your street engine with all his components. I mean, that's, it's great for a drag race engine, but he drives it for 10, 15 seconds at a time, and cool down, and and that's about it. So they want maximum flow, because they're not really sitting in traffic, and they're not idling for a long period of time. So try not to go too high on the flow and too high on the volume. I talked with some guys, like I talked with Smitty at Edelbrock, and one of the things is, there's a difference between high volume and high flow. And, high volume is going to move a lot of water.
Right.
And that's what you want to try not to do, is to move too much water. Do high flow, and what it is it's just not as much restriction. But again, if you start flowing too much, you're passing through the radiator and you're not giving it time to cool. So on a street engine, you don't want to flow too much. So, good questions, and I can do some research and give you a better, more informed answer. But I'd rather not try and throw a figure out now, because it depends on so many factors.
Yeah. I'm just gonna tell John 2 gallons per hour.
There you go. Speaking of gallons per hour,
I'll throw a figure out there for you, Mike.
I saw something on this site.
Yeah, you know, and he's asking a belt-driven pump is most likely the way to go, and that's, you know, here's the thing. You know, a lot of times I give advice and people say, well, where do you get this from? It's like, well, because I've been doing this since the 1970s, and I haven't gone with electric water pumps. I haven't gone to super high volume. I haven't had to go to, you know, it's always worked for me. And, you know, when you have the right setup, you're going to run fine. If you're overheating and you're getting to 220, 230 degrees, look at where you have a problem, but don't try to fix it with a Band-Aid by replacing parts and say, okay, well, I'm running too hot. Let me put a high volume pump on there. Still, you're running too hot. What's causing that? Because realistically, you think about these guys, you know, that they were running 400 and 500 horsepower years ago and didn't have, you know, aluminum radiators and didn't have these electric fans and all that. They're running a mechanical fan. You throw a magazine up in front of the radiator. If it sticks, you're good. If it doesn't, you move the fan a little closer. They weren't having these overheating issues like some people are having today. And sometimes I think people try to throw too many performance parts at it to solve the problem. And the real problem is make sure you've got good airflow, make sure you've got good coolant flow.
Let me ask you, Mike, what do you recommend a specific type of antifreeze, one over the other? Because not all of them are created equal. So
right, that's a great question, and I'll give you a little story. We had a guy call in, and he's telling us brand new engine. He's got a '67 Nova, and it's overheating, and we're going through everything. He says, no, it's not that. No, it's not that. Well, what kind of coolant you running? He says, well, I'm running the Ford coolant that I got in my Power Stroke. And I said, well, why are you doing that? And he says, well, it works on my Power Stroke. Well, it's designed to work for that engine. I said, you can't run these fancy coolants, and they don't work great in a aluminum radiator. So I said, you know what, just flush it all out. And I recommend Presto. The Presto, the concentrated. You can go with the mix, the premix. You actually spend a little bit more money because you think about it, you're buying a half gallon of distilled water in there, and it's 99 cents a gallon at the grocery store. Yeah. So he went and flushed it out. He went straight Prestone. People ask me, why do you recommend Prestone? And I say, because it's worked for 45 years for me. And so he called me back a few days later, and he says, yeah, I'm the guy with the Nova I talked to you about, the coolant. And I said, yeah, how'd it work out? And he paused for a second. He says, yeah, I'm running like 15 degrees cooler now. Did that hurt? And he says, yeah, a little bit. But that's the thing is that, there's some things that just work great. A question Jim's asking about water wetter. You got to know the history of water wetter. Water wetter was for guys that are racing because they're running straight water because they can't run coolant on the track. That's why a lot of racing radiators don't have petcock. They don't want the glycol-based coolant all over the track. It makes it very slick and it's hard to clean up. So water wetter was really designed to try and you're raising the boiling point of the water. You're not making it wetter, so to say. You're just trying to raise the boiling point. You raise the boiling point, and you can keep the pressures down a little bit. But they're not selling it as much when they're only selling it to drag racers. So they started marketing it for the street. I won't name any brands, but I did some of my own testing. I ran a water wetter product, not water wetter itself, but one of these products. And I ran it in my radiator and I tested it, and I didn't really see any difference. So really, what did I do? I poured $11 into my radiator and saw the same temperature. It worked great for, if you're running straight water because you can't run a glycol-based coolant, but it's really not necessary. Again, if you're overheating, don't put a Band-Aid on it. Try and find out what's causing the problem.
The surface tension of the water keeps the molecules down. I mean, there's science behind it. I remember reading about it many years ago, but it's been a while.
I want to start taking some courses and learning all that. But I think a lot of times, the people that when I do this and I learn this and I can spout off all these big words and chemical formulas. I think the only people who are going to really understand it are guys that that manufacture it. So, there's a point where you can overeducate yourself, and then you've lost your audience. And
I have to disagree with you, Mike, because I do this on the radio show. You try and get as educated as you can, and then the idea is educate others. And what I do is I tell people, listen, let me just throw this out there. It may be worth to understand, but write them down, look it up, and then do your research, and you follow it up. And then some people don't have the capacity that they just don't want to do it, but others like. We all want to learn stuff, so we'll actually do stuff like that.
Yeah, there's I love learning this stuff, and that's why I want to take some courses and learn a little bit more about it. But it's not that it's a bad idea, but it's just you can't just go into every situation with every gearhead or enthusiast out there and spout off all these numbers and formulas, because you start to lose them. And when people start talking, like I'm just starting to get into building engines and I watched some videos and 3 or 4 minutes into it, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go get a sandwich because I'm lost.
Right.
But it's fun to learn all this stuff and to gain this knowledge. But it's easy to lose somebody if you don't have the capacity to really explain it.
I want to ask you something. The El Camino that's on a lot of the videos, it was built by P&T Customs. Beautiful car. El Camino. In that car, there is a filter. I thought it was just a flow meter. It's a filter in the upper hose.
Right, yeah.
I'm very curious about that because I run a couple different filters in my car. I have a power steering filter and other things. And it caught my attention. And tell me a little bit about that.
We've had those for a little while, but this is a filter that we had designed for us. And I've seen it a couple other places. It's not. The guy who makes it for us is supposed to only sell it through us, and we sell it through Champion Cooling Systems. It is now we have chrome and black, and we have the gray, which I'm kind of marketing as a paintable. Scuff it a little bit, and you can paint it, engine color or body color or whatever with a thermal paint. But what's really nice about it is it has a polycarbonate lens. It allows you to see what's going on with your coolant, but it's going to trap the particles that are typically going to block the passages in your radiator. And you can pull it apart and you can rinse it out and clean it when it starts to get clogged. So it's really great. And when you've got nice bright green coolant, it looks kind of cool when you pop your hood at a car show. But we get a lot of attention. People look at it and go, hey, what's that? They see the green coolant in there.
What's the price point to that filter?
We sell them for about 74 and some change. Every once in a while, when we have like the holidays last year, we put a good sale price on it. Nice. When we go to shows, sometimes we'll knock the price down if people buy them and pay cash at shows.
There's no holidays in August. Shit, what am I going to do now?
Yeah. What's that?
Ray, ask him nicely.
There's no holidays in August. Like, what do I gotta wait? Gotta wait for
I know. Christmas in August. I'm gonna start doing some marketing videos to kind of explain it. Some people are saying, hey, what do we, when you take it apart, how do you put it back together? It needs to go together a certain way. The real simple formula is you want the particles that come out of the engine that goes in the upper radiator hose, the particles that come out of the engine like rust and dirt and debris and little gasket pieces. You want them to stick to the larger surface area, which is the outside of the filter. And that's easier to see. If you put the filter together backwards, then it fills up inside, and then you can easily clog the filter and not get any flow out of it. But we'll put some videos together to kind of show people, how it works. We put one on one of our employee cars, and it got dirty pretty quick. And so we're using that for some example. It's an old engine, but it grabbed a lot of particles. And so we took it off, and I had it in my garage for a while. Then when I started doing a video and I pulled it apart, and I thought, oh boy, that's some nasty stuff in that engine. But
let me ask you a quick question. You brought up a very interesting point about junk inside the cooling passageways in engines. So let's say someone's upgrading from a brass radiator to one of your aluminum Champion radiators.
Right.
What steps do you recommend to clean the old block out? I mean, you can't get it all out, but what's the best way to get most of the stuff out? This way, it doesn't cause any problem with the new radiator.
Water. Do not use a system flush. System flushes are fine on a new engine, but when you got old gaskets and old sealant and some rust and some dirt, guess what? You're loosening all of that stuff up, and you're going to send it all through your radiator. It's designed to break down these contaminants, and we had one employee that did it on his truck. He ran this flush through. He put a filter on, did a trip up to the Bay Area. He had to clean the filter out 5 times.
Wow.
And he's just getting all kinds of crap out of that engine, and it's it's nonstop. And that's the hard part about it, is that we used them a lot back in the 70s. We thought they were great, but that's the problem, is they are loosening a lot of stuff that you don't normally. You got somebody crawling. They're swimming behind you there, Lou.
Presto
That's a breaststroke.
Presto did a really good one, by the way. The Presto and flush was phenomenal.
There we go.
I can't. The Navy SEA dad didn't teach his son how to swim.
He didn't want to learn how to swim because he's an idiot. So moving on.
Oh my gosh. So if we have one of those filters on him, then he'll probably
swim.
It'll block him and stop him from flowing. But no, when flush systems are really not good for old engines, old seals, old gaskets. It breaks them down and it starts sending them through the radiator.
Oh shit.
How did you get here?
Wow, you went all the way up to Tori's
It's
place.
been a while since I've been in New York, so I had to come down here and say hi to my friend from New York. So I'm a Valve.
You're a good kid.
Close. It's kind of close. You got to school him a little more on that. Mike, let me ask you a question, because it was something that Tori said in the beginning of his statement, and what it was Tori mentioned an upgrade from copper to aluminum.
Right.
Learned that it's the other way. Copper actually cools better and transfers heat better than aluminum. What's your take on that?
Well, the aluminum, the problem with the copper brass is that the copper is great, but you can't hold it together without using some type of a lead-based solder.
Right.
And lead, as you know, is a heat soak. So as you seal it together, you've got some heat soaks in there. So that's part. Copper brass radiators aren't horrible. They're great, but and they worked for decades. But the problem is now you can't rot out the radiator anymore, especially in California. It's hard to find somebody that'll do that, and a lot of times they just want to recore it and they want $800. And that's where an aluminum radiator, price point. For instance, ours, you're about $220, $240 for a brand new all aluminum TIG welded, no epoxy, fully brazed, aircraft quality aluminum, lifetime warranty.
The prices on your stuff are phenomenal. I got to say, I was looking, and it is absolutely the best deal that I've seen. But
and we do custom work too. I was watching the show last week, and you had Troy on the show, and you got to talking. Tori, I mentioned to him, you got to talking about the Mulholland Speedster. Well, we built a custom radiator for that car.
Right.
And and it's kind of neat. So we're in some of these show cars. It was really cool that we built a radiator for that car. But we do that right in our own shop. We have a custom shop. If somebody comes in and they say, well, look, nobody makes this. I can find one at $1,600, but I got to get it record. We'll make one, and he's going to be in about a $400 or $500 price point for an aluminum radiator, custom made to fit in his vehicle. If we have to reverse engineer it and match what he took out, that's what we do. But guess what? He's going to get the lifetime warranty against any defects on that radiator from us.
There you go.
Is there any additional charge for custom work?
There's a little bit extra charge for that. Obviously, what comes off the shelf is going to be our better price point. But still, for the other radiators are out on the market that are off the shelf and cost 3 and 4 times what we charge for a radiator. A custom radiator, I mean, you can be in a full custom radiator for $400, $500, $600. depending on how far you want to go with it, which means, putting the inlet and outlet wherever you want it. If we have to custom fit it to, a grill shell like in an early 30s Ford or Chevy or Mopar, we can do all that. We make the custom brackets. If you want it to mount to a certain frame that you've built on the front of your car, you give us the measurements and the dimensions, and we'll put brackets on it that allow you to mount it to your specific vehicle. So, there is a little bit extra charge for that, but it's not what you would think. It's very affordable.
But the possibilities are endless, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now
there we go.
you got
I thought Ray didn't like the answer, or
yeah. It's
John Marcia Brady now. That's weird.
Brian wants to know if you have any transmission coolers, and do you do intercoolers, don't you?
Well, intercoolers,
like for turbos and stuff.
Yeah, we can make them. We can get them. We don't manufacture a line of them, but we've had a couple people that have wanted them built, so we'll custom make an intercooler. For transmission coolers, we have one that's it's more of a frame mount, and it's for vehicles that don't have the room for a transmission cooler, or they're running a little bit extra horsepower. It's really not great to have an AC condenser and then a transmission cooler in front of your radiator. You want to try and get as much airflow.
Right.
So, we have one that works really well. It's a double pass. So it goes all the way to the end. It has a divider in the middle, and it'll pass all the way back. It's got extraction fins that'll help draw the heat out. And you can mount it underneath the car somewhere, or a truck, somewhere like on the frame rail. And they work pretty decent. There's also a myth about transmission cooling. I'm getting ready to do a tech article with a local shop, Dyno Trans in Temecula, because we get guys that put these monstrous transmission coolers because they saw it at the auto parts store and says, "Oh, help cool." And it's like, well, you're not towing a boat up a 5% grade, so you don't really need that. And you got to keep in mind your transmission needs to work at an operating temperature of about 170, 180 degrees. If you're cooling it too much, your transmission's not going to perform as well. So we try to educate people with that too, so you're not going out and putting the biggest transmission cooler you can put.
Right. And Brad, which is Blown Mafia, you have one for a 69 Camaro? I'm sure you do.
Hey, there's Brad. Yeah, Brad, Blown Mafia, you need to look at these cars. We're going to be sponsoring.
Oh, I know Brad. He lives by me.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to give out the shout out to Brad here. We started working with him, and he's going to bring some of his insane Blown Mafia cars out to SEMA for the first time. And so we got in touch with him, and I said, "Brad, we want to put our radiators in your car." And he said, "Yeah, I'm all for it." So you're going to see his crazy cars, his 69 Camaro, his Mustang, I think called Trifecta.
Yeah.
And he's got a double blown C10, and that's going to be the car he's going to drive around all week. So I already called shotgun, so nobody else. But Brad's the nicest guy in the world, and I'm really looking forward to working with him. We're going to try and put as many radiators in his cars as we can.
Brian's Audi Quattro, the radiator's off to the side, and they have a smaller one up front. We've
done some pretty interesting vehicles when we've done some custom vehicles where we've had to do radiators off to the side because there's no place to put them. So we have run it. There's a lot of dirt bikes that utilize a pair of radiators and just passes through, past the frame. And, we can actually custom make those as well. There's really no limit. We have access to a bunch of smaller cores that we've used to do these custom builds. So, it's as long as there's a core available and whatever these sizes are, we can build a custom radiator for the customer.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. I didn't even think of that, but yeah. Now, I mean, I know that the I've been asked this question. I know, that your welders are TIGged. I mean, your radiators are TIGged. I've had a few guys ask me, if you can weld up the tanks on them, and I do know with aluminum you got to clean it really good after it's had antifreeze in it. Is it worth trying to weld it? Can you get it clean enough, I should say?
Yeah, we've done that. A lot of it too is using a good quality aluminum. You can't go out and use the best aluminum because you start bending it and you get stress cracks in it.
Right.
So you've got to use a good quality aluminum grade. There's some grades of aluminum that once they're put together, that's it. You try to weld on it, you're just going to tear right through it. And we avoid that as well. We have a very strict quality control process, and we make sure the materials are up to our standards, because we do get, where somebody's running a radiator and hey, you know what, I want to I've got a new engine, I'm doing an engine swap. This radiator is working great for me. It fits in my car, but I want to put the hose over on the other side. We really, if we're doing that, we'll weld a full plate to the upper tank or the lower tank, and weld to the outside and seal it up so we can move the hose location over. That way you don't have you've seen radiators that have this plate welded, and it really kind of looks ugly. So we just do a full new plate all the way across. We'll cut a hole in the opposite side, and we'll put the new inlet or outlet wherever they want it. So we've done that before. But welding to the outside, yes. Trying to weld to the inside after you've got all these chemicals, you've really got to clean it up really well. But you usually don't run into that where you're going to weld to the inside of a tank.
Right.
Cut it off and make a new tank and weld it on.
Okay. Because I've had people ask me that, and I tell them I really don't know, because I don't know how the antifreeze would act. You know what I mean? Because it's getting into the aluminum because it's exposed to it for such a long period of time.
Right.
It's getting hot and cold, so it's getting in the material.
Right, absolutely. So we just stick with the outside. If it's so far gone that we've got to we've got to cut a lot of it apart like that, we'll just make a new radiator. And a lot of times we'll work with people if they have a problem with the radiator and it starts leaking or something. I mean, we replace it. But if they want to modify it or something like that, we can do that. And it depends on what we've got to do. But yeah, when you get into the tanks, then like I say, the whole new plate, and that way you don't have it broken up with little patches. I had a radiator with a patch. They had to move the inlet, and I looked at it afterwards, and I thought, I just don't like that. He had to move the water neck, and then it started leaking, and I said, okay, well, he didn't solder the water neck, and it was on my copper brass. So I just thought, you know what, I'm not gonna, I don't like the little patches on radiators. I mean, that might be fun.
They look like crap.
Well, yeah, you want your local, I had my buddy, this guy down here, he'll fix it for, $35 and a sandwich off the Roach Coach. Then, maybe that's one thing. But
Roach Coach.
we're gonna do the right job, and we're gonna make it so it looks good. I mean, our name's on it, so we want it to look good.
Yeah. During the show, we did one on a Tri-5, so one of yours.
Yeah. Yeah. How'd you like that? That's our.
It was cool. It was really cool. I was. What I really liked that I thought was a really good idea? The template, the cardboard template that comes in front. That is the coolest idea, and nobody does that, because when you stop and think about it, usually you get this radiator, you're left to your own vices to make it work.
Right, and we've worked a long time with this. And this is a brand new product. It's our Tri-5 module that we make. We even make an AC condenser, and we have the tubes. We have the tubes manufactured for us to go beyond the firewall. But here's the real trick thing about ours is we've designed it so they all mount, whether you've got a 6-cylinder or a V8 core support. They all mount in a 6-cylinder position, with paddle fans, which produce, was going to pull the most air, but they mount to the OE core support. So you can go to like Classic Industries and buy a brand new OE style core support. and mount that in. You don't have to go to these fancy $1,300 core supports. You just use yours or get one from Classic Industries. I think they're, a couple $100, and our system mounts to it. You do a little bit of trimming, very minimal, but yes, the template we provide, we did all the measurements, and we show you how to lay the template up to your core support. And and you just go to the crosshairs, and you go with your center punch right in the crosshair, tap it, or if you have an automatic, you've got your drill points for all the hose entry, through the core support, through the side baffles, where you're going to mount it, what you've got to trim and everything. And here's the killer part. You get this custom looking radiator that's highly polished. It mounts to your OE core support for your Tri-5. It's going to cool a 500, 600, 700 horsepower engine. It's got a shroud that's mounted to it at our shop with 2 high velocity fans, and your price point is about $750.
Wow, that's great.
You add an AC condenser in the lines, you're going to add about another $150 to that. So you're under $1,000. I'm thinking about $850 for the whole deal for your Tri-5, and it looks killer. And you guys saw it, and I think Tori was I think he thanked me and praised it a few times. Text messages that night.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I mean, I was just absolutely blown away. I am still in shock. I still haven't come down from Cloud 9. The best way I could equate the experience is a kid going to see Disney and Mickey Mouse and Cinderella's Castle for the first time. I was just absolutely, floored by the whole experience. And Lou, I am grateful to you and to Michael and to everyone else, LSX Concepts, everyone who was involved with the project. I am just absolutely humbled, and for once I'm speechless.
And we're going to send you out as well. We didn't send them yet because these are brand new. So we have some of them. They're still in the manufacturing process, but we're finally, we're happy with it. And this is about the 4th go around. We've made subtle changes. So you're getting one of the newer ones that have got all of our research and development into it. And we're also making polished aluminum side panels, the side baffles for the core support. We're sending those out to you as well. And they're already pre-drilled. So our template is going to mark where you need to drill if you're going to use the OE baffles, or if you're going to, again, Classic Industries sells them. But if you get our polish set, if that's the way you want to go with it, they're already pre-drilled, manufactured for all the openings that you need. And, the price point on those is really affordable too. I think, don't quote me, but I think they're about $85 a pair for a polished aluminum.
Yeah, all that the attention to detail with the template reminds me when I put the vintage air system in my own car. They had the same thing, templates for everything, and it was because they did it on a bunch of cars. It was a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of times where I've been working on cars for years, and a lot my car is a project car with a magazine I used to edit. It was Street Muscle magazine, and we started racing the car at Willow Springs, and I started installing parts and working at the magazine and all the installs. Sometimes you wonder if the guy that did the instructions ever installed one.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And, and that's kind of what when they approached me about this, about, hey, we want to make a template for this, I said, all right, let's do this. Let's do it right. Let's do an install ourselves and make sure that it works for us too, because if it doesn't work for us, it's not going to work for the customer at the other end. So we went out and we did the measurements and we double checked them, and we had that get those templates printed. And the first time out, I don't know what the guy was drinking, but we just said, okay, no, we want the template to spread out to the full size of the cardboard. Don't try to make it fit, because these are measurements. They need to be accurate. So we had to go out and have it redone. Fortunately, it was just, here's the first print, approve it. We said, no, we're not approving that.
It sounds like the
33 inches. Maybe some guys think that's 33 inches.
Now, it sounds like the Stonehenge diagram from Spinal Tap. You know,
Yeah.
Do you know how big freaking Stonehenge is? I was like, no, but
Yeah.
you gave me this diagram. Like,
Every time I seen Stonehenge, it's about this big.
yeah. So
Right,
they were like
right.
6 inches. Yeah. And the Druids were like bigger than Stonehenge. It was pretty funny.
Hey, Lou, you know he was drinking.
I gotta run because I gotta get in bed, man. I've been on the road all day today and last night, so I gotta move. But
I appreciate hooking up with you again, man, and I look forward
anytime,
to
man. Anytime at all, man. So I'm gonna bounce. You guys hold down the fort, and I will see you guys later.
All right. Safe trip. Safe travels,
man.
All right, later.
All right.
Later. So, Michael, you know what they were drinking? They were drinking Blanton. That's what got them all hammered and what have you. When you said, I don't know what they were drinking. So, but I have a quick question for you also, though. All kidding aside, though. How long have you been working for Champion Cooling? Because I wanted, go backwards a little bit and see, where you started from, how you got into the business, and what led you to this point.
Well, do you want me to go all the way back, or you want me to start with the Champion, or what? Because I can go back to when I was born. I was really young.
Yeah.
Small. But I have my story of what really got me into this, and I think it's kind of a cool story. But I was about 5 years old, and I got one of those little toy cars. It's got the little spring motor, and you pull it backwards, it winds it up, and it shoots off. And I was amazed by this miracle motor inside this little toy car. And keep in mind, 5 years old for me was 1966. So, we really had some primitive toys, Lincoln Logs and Legos and everything.
We had that too, right, Ray?
Oh, yeah.
So my mom had told me, she says, you've been into cars, she says, you were 5 years old and you disappeared with your little toy car. And she says, I went looking for you, and I go in the back bedroom, and there you are. You're prying the little tabs off with a Lego, and you're pulling the body off so you could see this wind-up motor. And when I saw it, I was almost disappointed. I went, that's it? Holy crap, it made sense. And so I put it back together, and I play with it. And I still do that. Sometimes I shouldn't. But I get something, I get a car part, or I get something, and I pull it apart to see how it works. And I'm still doing that. 53 years later. But when we were talking earlier, I got into the automotive industry. I've always been an enthusiast, and I've always loved tinkering with cars. My very first car was a Triumph GT6 Plus. And, I raise the bonnet, sit on the tire, and by ear, I would sit there and I would balance my carbs and tune them and get it running really well. And so that was I kind of cut my teeth on that, replaced the head gaskets, all the little tiny, if you've ever seen a GT6 engine, say 2-liter 6-cylinder, your pistons are about like this. So it goes, it sounds like a Jetson mobile. But as I got older, I got into warehousing, and I just wasn't where I wanted to be. So I saw a job opening for shipping and receiving at a dealership, and I took that job. Worked my way up into parts. I later got into body shop management, parts management. I got into high-end performance. I worked at a shop in San Diego, and for about 2 years, if you had a Lamborghini, I was the guy you talked to get your parts. Then I worked for a company for 18 years as a tech editor, writing collision estimating guides and information. Then, in 2010, with the economy, with all my background, that's all I've done since I was about 24 years old. I got laid off. They were downsizing and getting rid of all the people that had been there longer. And I found myself at Street Muscle magazine. I was the editor for that for 5 years. And, working on cars, meeting great people like you guys, and going all over the country, being a guest on a couple of TV shows and whatnot. And then this position came up for, it started out as a writing car features for Champion Cooling, because Champion Cooling was one of our clients, and they said, hey, we like what you guys are doing, writing these car features. We want to hire somebody to do that for us. And so they asked me, said, what should we look for? What kind of experience? And, they're, they're saying, hey, there's this guy that wants to do this, and he wants all this money, and as they're describing it to me and the salary, I'm thinking, I want that job. And so these guys that they're saying, well, this guy, what do you think about this guy? He's a blowhard. Don't hire him. And meanwhile, I'm kind of sliding my resume in, and after a while, they said, he's not going to stop bugging us until we interview him. And so I went for an interview, gave my background, and I became their writer. But then all of a sudden, it was I've rewired cars. So I have an electrical background, so I could take all of our tech calls, and then experience with cooling systems, and we needed somebody that could do some of the tech calls for some of the more difficult things. So I became that. I got a graphics background, so I started doing a lot of our artwork for advertising and everything. So now I'm kind of, it's kind of branched out, and I'm not writing the car features as much as I was supposed to, because I've got so many other things that I'm doing. And so I've been at Champion now for just a little over 2 years. And, for some of the really difficult cases where people are having problems with overheating or trying to figure out why their relay's not working, and a lot of times I'm the guy they end up talking to now.
I had one quick question for you, just backtracking a little bit.
Yes.
The cooling fans that mount to the radiator, do you know the CFM rating on the fans, or do they vary depending on application?
They vary. I mean, we're starting to develop our own line of cooling fans. We've gone through this for a long time. We'll test them. I mean, we actually take a fan in back and we hook it up to a battery and we let it run for 8 hours. And if the motor's too hot to touch, then we go back to the drawing board and we say, this isn't going to cut it. We have 4 stages of fans. Obviously with the lower price point, you're going to have the lower CFM. With a guy that's going to be in a 200-300 horsepower range, you can get away with a low profile fan with not so much CFM. When you start getting up into more horsepower and you're racing your car, you're pushing a little bit harder. Then we get up into the paddle fans, which are going to be a lot more CFM, but they take up a lot more space behind the radiator, between the radiator and the engine. So sometimes people are limited on space. If they go to a serpentine drive, a lot of times you're forced to go to an electric fan. But bottom line is, if you can get a good mechanical fan in there with an OE style fan clutch, those things are going to move the most air, and they're going to work the best for you. And if you can run that, then we really recommend that. An interesting point about electric fans is you got to keep in mind, the industry didn't really need electric fans for a long time because all the engines were longitudinal. They started doing electric fans because the engine started going sideways. So once they started going sideways, they need electric fans to cool them. It wasn't because they were better. It was just because they had no other choice. So a lot of times people want to go to electric fans because, I want to do that. They're cooler. They look a lot neater. But now you're getting into, okay, what's the output of your alternator? Right. Do you have an original alternator? You're pushing out 45, maybe 60 amps. Well, you just added 220 amps fans. Yeah. So you've got to upgrade your alternator. And there's whole articles that we've written that are talking about adding up everything: your EFI, your cooling fans, your AC, your audio system, your lighting. And next thing you know, it's, okay, well, I'm trying to get 120 amps out of my 65 amp alternator.
You mentioned it before. You said Ron Francis, and that's one of the gurus that I follow. It's ground paths.
That's great.
We constantly preach ground paths to people. I mean, if you look at what's under what I've done to my own, I practice what I preach. So I show people, look, this is what I did. You have to make everything becomes a loop. The body becomes a ground plane. The chassis is a ground plane. You name it.
Right.
But electrical is the one thing people don't really understand. It's like black science to them. So you have to make it easy. Now I see people making relay kits. I mean, just for, you mentioned her name, relay, and people are out the door just to begin with.
Right.
So I like that the industry is making things easier for people. You have a little bit of proficiency and you can read. You don't have to know how to read a schematic. You just have to read instructions. You can do that.
Well, the ground circuit, that's a good point. And I've had some people look at my engine and they say, well, why do you have so many ground wires? And I've got, down to 2-gauge wires that are going from the right apron to the cylinder head. Then I got one going from that cylinder head to the other cylinder head, and then from that cylinder head to the other apron. Then I've got one on the back of each cylinder head going to the firewall, and I got my battery in the trunk. So that ground wire runs all the way up to the front, but it's also grounded at the back. Right. So somebody says, why do you have so many grounds? And I said, well, I don't have any electrical problems.
Right. Yeah, we were just talking about that last week. One of my cars is a Fiat Spider, and the way they did it from the factory is they put the battery in the trunk, and they ran the positive cable forward, obviously for the starter, but the ground cable goes from the battery right to the metal box that it's mounted in, and that's it. Yeah. So I finally got a chance to get my own car in the lift and run a piece of welding cable from the battery up to the front of the car and ground the engine. Again, make a ground loop, just kind of.
Right. Yeah. Have you guys heard of resistance?
Yeah.
All that metal going through the car up to the front, you're adding a lot of resistance to the vehicle, just trying to get power and to get your engine grounded, get all your components grounded. And if your battery's in the trunk and you've only got a ground at the trunk, it's going to be very weak when you get to the front. So
I have a question for Ray and for Michael, okay? Because I'm doing that same exact thing right now. On the 55, the batteries be mounted in the trunk. And Ray, I know you know your stuff when it comes to electric. I know you always, you're over the top with grounding and routing and the proper gauge and stuff like that.
My madness.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So my question is, how thick of a wire do you use, going from the trunk to the starter? And keep in mind now these cars have, Michael, like, electric fans and more electronics. We're taking the old school technology out of it and we're just adding more and more stuff. So what would be sufficient to run?
Well, you're talking about I would break that into two separate questions. The supply to the starter, and then what you want is from the alternator, the actual charge wire from the alternator has to be optimized also, which is going to be at least a 4-gauge cable as far as I'm concerned. Right. But there's a formula you can use. I mean, if you want to you could just ballpark and you say, you know what, at least O gauge,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of them they recommend like double aught for the, especially I got a big car, like I got a Plymouth and, 17 feet long and run a double aught cable.
Right.
Well, then you see the price per foot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, alternator wise, I have this little trick that what I do on the alternator, I have a 100 amp alternator and initially it was, you can run this 8-gauge wire. So I ran this 8-gauge wire and I ran it, instead of running it all the way back to the battery, which 8-gauge would not be enough, I ran to the large cable that I ran up to the front, and I have a junction that goes through the firewall, and I ran it directly to that. Well, I started up the car, I let it run, and I put my hand down on the wire. If I feel warmth at all, then I go to a bigger wire.
Wire is too small.
Yeah, that's
a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Ron Francis preaches is they talk about using a body as ground, which is and a chassis as ground, which theoretically works. But they also mention that steel does not transmit electricity as well as copper, and copper is where it's at. So you got to have your main ground should be copper. What I use for all my secondary grounds is Standard Motor Company sells it. They're pre-made braided ground straps, and they make them in 4, 6, 8, and 12 inch lengths, and they're great. Use star washers and some good hardware. Yeah, that's good for grounded engines to firewalls, and I mean I've grounded the trunk floor to the chassis with a piece of O gauge. I have a crimper that I'd gladly lend it to you. You can do those crimps, the battery cable crimps.
Sounds good.
I love that. I used a spark plug, little aluminum block for spark plugs, and I use that for my 2-gauge, and just it puts it in a vise and crimps it. I had a hand crimp for it, and I after a while I was like, okay, I'm not that strong anymore. Right. After a couple of them, your wrist is kind of sore.
I did a couple battery cables with the one, you hit it with a hammer, bang, it's like an anvil.
Yeah.
But it's I've had spotty results. So actually, Harbor Freight sells a hydraulic.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. They're really nice.
It was like Lou even bought one. When he saw it, it was like $55, $59. It lets you do from 12 gauge, which is kind of cool. You can do small stuff, which I don't know why a big thing, and it'll go up to battery. I don't know how. I forget if it's O or double O it'll go to, but I've done full size battery cables with it, and you get a lot of pressure on that thing. So it's
and there's you talk about ground kits, and a lot of guys that I guess they're still doing it. I still see it once in a while, but back in the 80s and 90s when there was everybody and their brother had these high output audio systems. There were companies, and you can probably still find them at high-end audio stores. They sell these grounding kits that, you give you a good block that you can run from your battery to run a double-aught gauge to, or a double-aught wire to, and then they have about 10 or 12 grounding straps to go to your engine block, to go to different areas and various lengths, and you just, ground everything you possibly can. And, a lot of people, why are you doing it? Well, these guys are looking for as much power as they can to their amplifiers so they can rattle the windows and everything. And they had the right idea. You're grounding every single thing you can. Exactly. Your alternator's on your engine, and you've got to make sure you've got all these good grounds. Exactly. And those kits were pretty neat, but they get all the different wires that you can use for grounding the system.
The other thing not to forget is to ground the alternator. People think, well, it grounds through the brackets. Yeah, technically it does. But there's always a stud on the back. There's a boss on the back of the alternator.
Right.
It's a ground lug. Ground it right to the engine. You need a short piece of, less than like a foot. That's about it.
We had a customer. I was at a Pontiac dealership back in the late 80s, and the guy had an alternator problem, so we gave him an alternator. He brought it back and said, "Oh, it's not working." And so gave him a second one. It's not working. It's not charging. And so gave him a third one. It's all right. You need to bring your car in. And so the Grand Ams had a kind of a fiber type bracket for mounting accessories, and there was a threaded boss on it. When the guy installed his alternator, he took the ground wire and he went to this fiber bracket because he didn't know where the ground wire went. He wired it up to this, and we're trying to tell him, it's like, oh, well, you're not grounding your alternator. That's like a plastic composite piece, and you have to ground your alternator. He says, well, it's grounded with the bolts. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a good ground. And you think about it, you've got a chrome plated, or you might have a painted or a powder coated alternator. You've just lost your surface contact.
Right.
So like Ray's saying, go to that bolt on the back, and I run a 2-gauge wire off my alternator to the cylinder head.
That's why even with those grounds, I'm a big fan of star washers. I have a big selection of those. People actually buy, and I use them on both sides of the cable. Right. Like I want to make sure that damn thing is grounded.
Yeah, because it kind of cuts into
into the paint.
Surface of it.
Yeah, you can buy nuts as well. It's a flange nut that has like a little serrated. I love those too. It's a nice bite.
Those are great.
But there's something I want to mention. I just saw on the internet. Matco has a new tool that I want to talk to Brian about. It looks like a power port. You plug it into any lighter or like power adapter in your car, and it gives you 2 big brass lugs, one power, one ground. So this way, if you're working in the car and you need to use a test light or something, or power something up, you don't have to go searching into the fuse box or looking for a ground somewhere. You got to climb under the dash. It's getting harder to get under the dash these days. So I'm very happy to see Matco come out with that. So I'm going to want to know more about that thing. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Ray, you're probably a sick puppy like me. I love doing wiring. I mean, I rewired my car last year, and I loved it. And people are like, how can you like wiring? And I have one thing to offer people, and I've had friends that have had audio systems, and they run a wire from the battery all the way back to the amplifier, and they don't fuse it, but they fuse it at the amplifier. And I had a friend, and I opened his hood, and the wire is going over the cowl. The hood's kind of pinching it. And I looked at that, and I went and I cut the power cable at the battery a couple inches. I said, I just saved your car from catching fire. And he says, I've never had a problem before. And I said, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a car on the side of the road and it's on fire? He says, yeah. I said, they never had a problem before either.
Right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of like not to that degree, but being a child of the 70s, I can't tell you how many friends I had. They put a stereo in the car, and they would just throw a set of speakers up in the rear deck lid and just run the speaker wires through the interior. And just wire. Like, what the hell are you doing, man?
I never did that.
I know it doesn't take that much, but
and household wire nuts. Oh my gosh!
Right.
I got into it when I was at the magazine. I posted on our Facebook page, and I said, if you see this in a car, tell that person never to touch your car again. And I had all these people arguing with me and telling me, you don't know anything. I go, no, that's not for stranded wire. That's for household wiring. Right. And, again, you talk about, a child product of the 60s and 70s. I think almost all of us use wire nuts to hook our speakers up. But then, you're driving along and you see this plastic blue wire nut on the floor, and you know where it came from. It came from your speaker. They don't hold up to the vibration.
I'm a big fan. I was trained, in electronics, but I like to solder everything.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
But now I'm getting conflicted because there's a guy, Tony, out at CE Auto Electric. He's in Arizona. Good friend, an excellent guy, and him and another couple guys I follow. Now the trend is starting to go back to the merits of a good crimp. One of the things I was able to do as one of my jobs as a metallurgist was to section and look at crimped connectors, and see, under a microscope how they worked. And I was just doing some work on my car yesterday. I had to extend a couple of wires from a relay, and I used my bare connectors, and I crimped them with my new Snap-on connectors that I really like, my new tool. And I said, you know what? I'm tempted to solder over it again. And I said, you know what? I'm going to shrink tube it, and I'm going to leave it the way it is, because I did the pull test. It was strong. I said, let's go with that and see what happens. I'm fighting it all the time, though, because my go-to is solder.
You see,
there's a lot of people. I have a friend that did that. He did a Ron Francis kit, and he soldered every connector. And I thought about that with mine. I said, I talked to Scott's at Ron Francis. Scott's really good, and he's done tons of cars himself. And I asked him about it. And if you're gonna do the wiring, invest in a good set of crimp tools. Yeah. Don't go out to Radio Shack and just buy the the $9 or Lowe's or whatever and buy the real simple one. They don't give you a good crimp. Buy a good solid crimp tool. I got one from Pertronics. And one of those ratcheting with the different jaws, and they're pricey, but I'll tell you what, I love that thing. I do my spark plug wires with it, all my electrical wiring.
And I'll tell you this, I just bought 2 new tools from Snap-on, 2 new crimping tools. But I also have some channel lock crimpers that are very, very good. So again, you don't have to go to a tool guy. You don't have to do that. But you could go to Lowe's and buy channel lock, but go to the electrical section. Make sure you get what the electrical
exactly.
And then learn how to use them, because people also don't really know how to use. They typically, what I've seen, people strip way too much wire, too much insulation, and they usually cut in and take a few strands with it. That's
right.
So get a little bit of an
stripper tool too.
Yeah.
I have one. Yeah,
and that's so much better. We used to razor blade and roll the wire, and and you always get a 3 or 4 extra strands, and in a pinch that works. But I've got this stripper tool. It's got the jaws that grabs it and pulls the sleeve off, and I've been using that for about 22 years now, and it's just
that's what I posted on Instagram about a week ago. I found I was redoing. I sat one day talking about wiring. I sat in the garage, and one of my favorite things to do is put on the right music, get some coffee, light a cigar, and I sat and it was my day to sort electrical connectors. So I sat out there with ring terminals and spades. I sat there for about an hour and a half. But what I found was my pair of automatic strippers that it fell behind, the boxes on the shelf. I said, wow, I've had these for like 40 years, and I miss them. I'm glad I got them back. So I posted those up on Instagram to show.
I saw that.
Kind of a throwback, but they work great. They work great. But the other thing was, you're talking about a razor blade. I'll still do that occasionally, especially if I have to take out a middle of a piece of wire to pigtail a piece of wire.
Yeah, I've done that.
I had friends growing up who would use their teeth to strip the wire. I was like, geez.
Yeah, I use my teeth chewing on a ribeye. That's about it.
Same guys. It was the same guys that would take bottle caps off with their teeth.
What do you think about Scotch locks? I absolutely hate them.
I have a drawer of them at the shop, and and the label that I made for the drawer says fire starters, because that's what they are. Now I'll tell you, I've done the metallurgical test on those things in other applications, and they do hold up, but they have to be done correctly. Yeah. I'd say if it's a nice, easy way to tap into a wire. It's great, but I avoided it like I said, I'll cut out a 1/4 inch of the middle of a run of a wire, and then take my new wire and solder it in, pigtail it, and tape it.
Well, I found with a Scotch lock that the times that I've used them that, you know, it's nice. It strips the wire and it puts the wire up inside and clips it. But I've also found that it has cut a couple of the strands.
Yeah.
And, you know, the important thing to think about electrical is when you have a weak connection, what are you going to get? You're going to get some heat, and you're going to get some resistance. Current is going to get you heat. And I can't tell you how many times we talked about our relays, and people have bad connections, and I pop the hood and they say, my fan's not working. I look and I see that some of the connectors are starting to melt a little bit because they're getting hot. The relay plug is starting to distort a little bit. I'm like, you have a fire brewing here. And, you know, I learned a long time ago that I do better wiring than is acceptable. Right. Manufacturers, they will determine what kind of a load they're going to have on a wire and how long the wire is going to be. And they will use the smallest wire they can possibly use because they're using 1 million miles of it and building millions of cars, and that saves them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Me, I look at the minimum wire that I could use, and I go one gauge larger.
I'll tell you, this is the book that guy Tony Candela wrote from CE Auto Electric.
Nice.
You can get this. It's what was that? SA Automotive. You can get this through actually on Amazon. This is the go-to, and in fact, he has all the charts, all the resistance charts. Well, he shows how to make terminals.
Yeah.
This
I
thing
like
is
that.
like
I get that.
This is like it covers all the strippers, different strippers, and how to use them. Yeah. And he has all the. There's a chart in here somewhere of basic, resistances by wire by foot, typical.
Right.
He goes into wire diameters and whatnot. Now he sells wire. He sent me some samples, and the stuff is like you hold it, it's like spaghetti, but it's like like
nice.
2 gauge, because there's so many strands. And to get into the technical, we were talking before about education. I explained this to people. I said, the more strands you can get, the better. And I'll show them 2 comparable pieces of wire, one that Tony sent me and one off the shelf, and say, I don't know what the exact count is, but let's just say, a normal piece of wire that you can get off the shelf is maybe 100, 120 strands. His same gauge wire is maybe 2 to 250 strands.
Wow.
Maybe even more. And I tell people to find out, to get the resistance of that piece of wire, the way you do it mathematically is you take a cross section, but not perpendicular. It's an oblique cross section of the wire. Yeah. So now they're oval, and you got to use some calculus. You can find the area of each strand of wire, and then you add it up, and then you plug that into a formula, and you get the information. But you don't have to know how to do it. You just have to know what works and what doesn't work. And,
more strands is more surface area that the current can travel on too, and that's another reason that use stranded wire and don't use household wiring for your car. But it's the more strands, you got more surface area that the current can travel. So yeah, the more strands, like you're saying, you've got a much better wire.
The other thing about that is the strands, again, I saw this through the microscope, they will crimp, they'll close together, and those strands will get much, much closer to each other. Whereas the bigger strands of wire, you'll see air gaps in between.
Yeah, you've got gaps in between, yeah.
We're talking microscopic here, but in the air gap is where corrosion can live, where corrosion can breed, and of course, resistance goes up.
That's the reason why, though, I like using, I solder everything. My dad, even since I was a little kid, he was a big proponent of soldering everything. And as a kid, I took his Weller, soldering iron, still have it to this day. And in my Camaro, when I first started working on that car, everything got soldered and shrink wrapped. Yeah. Then you're really not too intimidated by using a soldering iron. So when I started doing my Lionel stuff, fixing locomotives and Lionel ZW transformers, a lot of the old timers, they would wire nut the wire somewhere in the middle, inside the bottom of the case of the transformer. I went right up there. I took the old wire out right at the core, for God's sake. So I always like soldering. I'm a big believer in it. I know the connections probably work, but there's nothing better, in my opinion, than using this a good solder joint and shrink wrapping at the end. And I got to tell you, I love
it's great.
I love to pay stuff forward. I like to impart the knowledge I have to other people, especially younger people, because you can't take it with you. I mean, you can, but it's going to be with you forever. It's going to do nobody any good. So what I do I happen to work at a school, and I do a soldering demonstration every year. I was doing it for our engineering students. Now, I work in the engineering department, and we have the most brilliant kids. I mean, these are engineering students. These kids are smart at like 19, 20 years old. They know calculus. They know, you name it. They know stuff that I can't even think about.
Can't even pronounce.
Well, yeah, true. But a lot of them have never they've never soldered anything. They haven't built a circuit. They haven't had to do any kind of wiring. They can do the theory and give you the numbers all day long. But I'm a big fan of working engineers. A guy who can use his hands and do the math. Now you got somebody who can solve a problem. So I do a soldering demo with them where I bring them into a room in our electronics area and just show them the basics of soldering. And a lot of them, you see that light bulb go off like, oh, I get it. All right. And I just did it last semester for the kids at the radio station where I do my radio show. I talked to the program manager, said, listen, let's put it out there. Let's see how many of these kids want to go on and become, maybe they want to be radio engineers. They don't want to be air talent. They're going to be behind the scenes. I had 4 people come. One of them was a girl, and she actually had some prior training, and they loved it. Every single one of them at the end of the day made strong joints. I showed them the difference between a cold and a hot solder joint. And it's just a matter of just showing them. My own daughter with her design work, I showed her stuff with hot glue guns and just how to use basic hand tools and razor knives without taking your fingers off. And I found you show kids something, they're either going to want to know more or they're going to go another way. And if they want to know more now, you're going to get phone calls and texts. But that's great. I mean, I feel that's our job is to pass that on. Yeah,
I loved, when people are inquiring, and a lot of the articles that I took on, when I was at the magazine, instead of taking on the approach of, the seasoned veteran, I said, okay, well, I'm going to write this article for the guy that's thinking about doing this for the first time. And, what do you need to think about? You want to get your plan in action. How do you put all the pieces together and, stick to your plan? Once you devise what you want, stick to your plan. And it's great teaching people like that. We had auto shop when I was in school. They need it again. It needs to be part of the curriculum.
One of the things, again, I helped my daughter with this through her schoolwork, but I see it at school also. I was trained in technical writing. So, I also do a lot of writing for fun too, but technical writing is one of my things. And one of the papers we'll have the kids write is like, okay, who drives a car? Everybody raise their hand. All right, you drive a car. Have you ever changed a flat tire? Some did, some didn't. Okay, if you haven't done it, research it. If you have, write a paper, give me 300 words, how to change a flat tire. And usually it's like, get out of the car, take this, they'll skip all the rudimentary steps. And the idea of technical writing is open the trunk, you put the key in the lock, open the trunk, step by step, just like you'd find in a factory service manual. I took the tire out of the trunk. Or really, was it just laying on the floor? Or did you have to undo a wing nut on the jack to take the, whatever was, and then they start seeing like, oh wow, that's a lot. Like, yeah, but you know what? If like with our lab experiments, a lab report is written and can be given. Tori, I could give you the lab report, and you'd be able to go into the lab, look at my equipment list, take the same equipment out that I used, and do that experiment the way I did it, and maybe get the same results, just like a factory service manual. That's how you're supposed to write, technical. And once kids see that, they're like, oh damn, I never thought of that. Yeah, of course not. But that's the idea. Now you're going to think about that.
But that's a big problem though, because the kids today, they're not trained the way we were. They don't write as well as we do. It's the kids are smart today. Don't get me wrong, but their writing skills just aren't up to par.
There's a reason for that too.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, not everybody has to know how to write technically. Most people don't. And of course, I want to get the guy that wrote all the FSMs because, of course, disconnect negative battery cable, and at the end, reverse procedure to put it back together. Like what?
Yeah.
But we all know that.
For all of my cars, I've always loved getting the factory manuals, and you pay a little bit more for them. But I like those other than the generic ones you find at the auto parts store, because I would tell people that the generic repair manuals you get, they tell you how to replace a part. The factory manual tells you how to take it apart, test it, put it back together, and then put it back in. And and I've even got one for my 65 Plymouth. I picked up one for a 55 Plymouth because that's one of my dream cars. I want to get a 55 Plymouth one day. I've got a couple of Toyotas. I got the factory manuals for those. And I've used them so much where I've had a problem that the dealer couldn't find, told me, you need to replace this part. And I go home and I, break out my ohmmeter and I test all the parts. And I go, this is working fine. I'm not going to buy that $75 switch. And something else that's causing the problem. And, nowadays people aren't even testing anymore. If they can plug a device in and it tells them what's wrong, that's great. But if you don't have OBD2, nowadays hardly anybody's actually diagnosing a problem anymore.
One of the Haynes manuals I used to like back in the day, because they'd actually take the vehicle, be it a car or a motorcycle, and take it apart. And as they took it apart, they photographed it in real time. The only problem I had was the photographs were mostly black and white, and they looked like grease. You really couldn't see detail. Yeah. But one of my favorite factory service manuals was for a 79 Accord that I had back in the 80s. And it actually called out not only the head sizes of the bolts, but the wrench or socket size that you needed to take that fastener off. I was like, oh my God, this is great. Leave it to Honda.
I had a Mazda one year, and this is what turned me off of the generic manuals, is that it was a Mazda 626, and it was a 1980, and I knew that 79 and 80 was one particular car, and 81 and 82 was a different body. Same general car, but they were different enough that the manual was for 79 and 80, but the picture of the car in the front was a 1981. And then when I opened it up, the first picture I saw was a Chrysler V8 engine compartment. And I'm like, okay, this is a 4-cylinder. So I kind of looked at it and I go, okay, well, I've already got all these strikes against me right now with this manual. And so I went out and bought a factory manual, and it's been great. And there's, I get into the cars. A couple of the cars I have, I had a Celica, and I used to tell people the only two components I never took out of that car were the heater core and the fuel tank. Everything else I removed from the car, cleaned it up, put it back together when I restored it. And, the factory manuals helped me figure out how to take these things apart, and it made it a lot easier. So I love them.
Sorry, I can't resist.
You see, I love it.
There you go.
But here it is. This is the factory 55 Chevy assembly manual. And you're right. I mean, just go to any page, and they're all pull-out diagrams.
And before you did that, I was going to explain to Michael that when you jumped up, there's nothing that he doesn't have.
I don't know about that. Really, I don't have. Of all things
if you say limited slip adder from GM, he's gonna pull a box. He's gonna pull a bottle out.
You have that, but yeah. But that's it. And Joe, my co-host, and I talk about this all the time because he's an old school mechanic, but he's a new school tech. He does diagnostics, and he works at Standard Motors. And I ask him a couple times a week for diagrams or schematics or call outs. I just asked him for one tonight because he has access to that. And between him and I, our libraries. I mean, behind me, I have a banner here, but I have a double wall of nothing but floor to ceiling books and manuals.
Nice.
And I'll have to pass them on to somebody, but people don't want to use manuals anymore. Yeah, I'll give them to you, man. When I don't give them anymore, but we're about the same age, so that's going to be.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's interesting because like you're showing the manuals, and I have this. It's a '79 Toyota Corona, and I've modified it, and I put a super rear end in it. I put Cressida brakes on the front, so I got the vented rotors, and I'm getting ready to put a Dakota Digital cluster in the car.
Nice.
I'm working with Scott out at Dakota Digital. Scott Johnson's been great, and I've got their products in my Plymouth, and I love them, and they're just awesome products. So I have this universal cluster I want to put in this Corona. Well, I know most things will work, but I thought, okay, well, can I get the speedometer to work? So I call up Scott, and he says, we have this little adapter because we do a cluster for the Land Cruiser. So they have these little pucks that work with that. I go, okay, I got that down. Now, okay, the fuel sender. I got to figure out what the resistance on my factory fuel sender is. And I start to search for it on the internet, and I stopped and I said, I got a factory manual for that. So I go and look it up, and it tells you how to send, and it says, okay, yeah, at full you should be 3 ohms, and give or take, and empty you should be 110. and halfway you should be sitting at this. And I'm like, perfect. So now I know that it's going to work with the with the gauge cluster and everything, and then I can use my factory sender. I'll have to try and figure out how to put an aftermarket one in there, and and I get that from the factory manual, and you can't get that from some of the generic manuals. And try to find it online, and you've got ranges from it's going to be 250 to 100, no 0 to 3. You can't find the answer sometimes.
Information. Tori, another thing that you may in the future may want to borrow. At the shop I work at, I did a bunch of gas tanks and non-working fuel gauge diagnostics. And what I found was, I'd use a potentiometer. I would just break the line. I'd use a potentiometer and see if I could make the gauge work. And then I knew where my problem was. So I said, I'm going to make a box that is selectable resistance box that I could plug in. And I found out by looking through my manuals, GM has one, part number J1652, whatever it was. And they called it out. I have it in my Buick service manual. I said, Dan, they did actually have one of these. So
wow.
The part number on it, even though it's not a real GM kit. But I made it, and I just lent it to my friend Kevin to diagnose his GTO with. So, and it's just a 0 to 90 ohm sender, just like you said.
Yeah.
But, but all that stuff is again, that's like you were saying, how it's kind of lost. There are still guys who do it. It's just, everybody wants the answer now. They don't want to figure out how to get the answer. They just want the answer. And that's a problem too. I mean, I say this all the time to guys of our generation. We're maybe like the tail end of that kind of sensibility where
I don't want to think that.
But
I had a coworker that used to ask me, questions, and I would try and teach him how to get to the answer. And he's, I don't have time for that. Just give me the answer. I'm like, here. And I would send him a link. I said, here's your answer. And he would click on it. It's let me Google that for you. And I don't like just giving an answer to somebody if they're not willing to learn. Then I'm kind of like, you know what, go out and learn yourself, because I like to teach. I don't like to give answers,
right,
because I think that's dangerous when people just want the answers. They don't know how you get to it, and they assume that applies for everything. And we all know the automotive world, there's really no consistencies.
But you have to understand how things work and how to get. You have to know how to diagnose something. There are certain steps that you have to take, and you can tell me the answer, and I'll just replace it, but I won't understand why.
Yeah, and that's it's an interesting. There's a story, a joke that goes out, and this young couple gets married, and for Thanksgiving they're going to have the whole family over to their house for Thanksgiving, and so the wife she's going to put a ham in the oven, and she cuts the ends of the ham off and she lays it in the pan, and some of her guests says, "Well, why do you cut the ends of the ham off?" She says, "I don't know. My mom's always done it that way." So she gets on the phone. She gets her mom over. She says, "Mom, how come you cut the ends of the ham off when you bake a ham?" He says, "Well, my mother always did that." So they get on the phone. They call Grandma. And they say, "Grandma, why did you always cut the ends of the ham off?" She says, "Because the ham was too big to fit in the oven. I had to cut the ends off to get it in there." And and that's the problem, is that people, they see an answer, they don't know why they get to it, and they just repeat it, and it's.
Tell me, why do you always roll the braciole and garlic and olive oil in the pan? Why do you do that? Because I do
it's
that.
Tasty. It's tasty.
There you go.
Our name's on a vowel, Ray. So
I know. And here is Macro Man Brian. Hey, Macro Man.
Hey, Brian.
Hi,
Hey
Brian.
guys,
How are you?
doing?
Hey, Brian.
Good to see you.
Jeez,
He was doing cartwheels. He's so happy to be here.
that was a ride, man. Wow.
I had you guys on the computer and the phone.
So, Brian, you've had a lot of experience with techs, like you said, with guys, and you deal with guys all the time because you're a tool man, so you see these guys every day. What's your thought about the thought about going forward? Are these guys turn into glorified parts changes, or do they really want to diagnose?
Well, that's the biggest problem, because they buy a scanner, they don't understand how to use a scanner, they can't read a wiring diagram, and like today I had to explain why we have to check for a ground, or why are we missing a ground? You know, that's one of the biggest problems, especially with German cars, and I got a lot of experience with that. But it just amazes me that just because somebody says, oh, it's a O2 sensor, or like you said, a coolant temperature sensor, and they don't understand how that affects the fuel.
Right.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, you know, I spend a lot of time, a lot of my day explaining what to use, where to go, and how to start testing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that you reminded me of a really good example is that I went to an MSD ignition and distributor on my Plymouth. Now, you know, these older cars, they had a ballast resistor. Well, I just eliminated the ballast resistor, and I can't tell you how many Mopar internet professionals and, you know, told me, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. And you try to explain to them, it's like, look, the ballast resistor was to limit the voltage
to the points.
to your points. You got 12 volts to start the car, but once it was running, you had to run in a start mode. And I said, but you if you're going to an aftermarket coil that can run on 12 volts like that, and you've got an aftermarket distributor, it's electronic, you don't have points anymore, you don't need that ballast resistor. And I can't tell you how many people told me I was wrong. You're going to have a fire. And I'm like, okay, I've been running this for 12 years. So
you know what it is, Mike? I'll tell you something. That the Mopar guys love seeing their hardware on the firewall. Of course, that's right. Where that ballast resistor sits.
Yeah.
Us GM guys have a resistive wire, so you really can't tell that it's a resistive wire.
Right.
You mentioned Petronics before. I happen to use their ignition, their billet distributor, and the igniter module in it. And the one thing I did is I installed a relay to power that distributor. And the first thing you have to do is take that resistor wire out and run a 12-gauge wire. You know, you want full system voltage and current to that relay, and without it, you know, you're choking your own system off. But
the funny part, like you were talking about with the MSD, Sundays we have a car group that meet up at a place where I live, and it's so funny because there was a guy and he had a 65 fastback, and he was having all kinds of ignition problems, and he. You know, somebody talked him into the biggest and the baddest MSD box thing that would fix his problem.
Yeah.
And I just asked him, I said, are you using the stock harness? And he's like, well, I wired it in. And I said, well, there's a resistance on the Ford.
Yeah.
So you have to eliminate that. And they, you know, he wanted to argue with me. And I was like, well, continue to have the problem.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, you know, yeah, I get that sometimes where people, I tell them something, they go, well, no. And I go, well, if you know that's not what it is, then how come you don't know what it is? You can tell me I'm wrong, but you can't tell me what it is. And it's like, I'm trying to help you. Yeah. But yeah, it's like, okay, well, I've been doing this for a long time. I removed my ballast resistor a long, long time ago, and you're still telling me that I'm going to have a fire. Okay, well, that's
to some degree, I think, again, people don't want to read. They don't want to educate themselves. And sometimes I blame the media because they glorify stuff like MSDs and they don't really go to this, like Lou's show, you know, CarFix will show you how to do something.
Right.
On our radio show, we'll tell you how to do it. And I won't get into a big, long thing on the air because we only have an hour a week. And by the way, Tori's going to be sending me your information so I can invite you to come on the show with us and do a radio bit too. But I will tell people, listen.
That's the way things work.
Yeah, I'll tell people, get a hold of me offline, email me, and I will go through the pains of getting you through this, you know, and we'll send diagrams and whatever it takes, you know, we'll send it to help. Because again, you know, it's like, you know, where Cy Sims said it, right? An educated consumer is our best customer. You know, like
when I'm building a circuit and I'm adding stuff in, I mean, I actually draw out my wiring harness that I'm going to build and where I'm going to put fuse blocks and all that stuff. I mean, colored. Yeah, I do it colored too.
Colored pencils.
I don't know how many people you know that like my audio systems that I'm a graphic designer, so I draw a lot of stuff on the computer. I use Corel Draw primarily. But when I do my audio systems, I mean, I draw the components, I draw the wiring, the speaker wire, the power wires, all that stuff. I color code them and I do the whole thing out. So I know what wiring I'm going to do. I've drawn my wire harnesses when I redo the car. So I have that. I mean, I even draw out my emission systems. With all the hoses on my old Toyota. I've done a Weber, a Smog League, a Weber carb, and I draw the whole system out with every hose where it needs to go. And whenever I need to pull something apart, I don't worry about it because I go back, I put my drawing down, and I can hook everything back up. I love schematics, and they're great to work with.
Vein, one of the things these guys just see me do it, but I happen to have access to full-size plotters at work. So if I know I'm going to work on a car and I don't want to use the glasses, I will take that schematic or the diagram. Brian's actually sent me a couple that I used, and I'll load it in the computer and I'll plot it like E-size, 24 by 36. E-size is 36 by 48. I think that's the biggest size.
Nice.
And and I'll plot it out, and then I just like magnetize. I'll magnet it to the lift or onto the hood of the car, and I got those all around the shop. People are like, what the hell is this? Like, just diagrams for an ignition switch, or it's a piece of a schematic or whatever.
Me getting into my work.
Yeah, right.
You see, Ray, you know what it is though? People don't like to plan. They don't want to do the homework, and God forbid they make a mistake, they don't want to be corrected.
Yeah, I guess.
And that's a huge part of the problem. We're here to help.
There's some times where you realize that sometimes people don't want to be helped, and you don't offer help unless they ask for it. But you can sit back and you cringe and you see what somebody does, and I look at it and it's like I was talking earlier about my friend with his wiring, and he's crimping or he's pressing the hood against the wire over the cowl one back, and he says, well, I have a 15 amp fuse on. I go, what are you going to do about this? And I used to have guys that they would see my audio systems I do and my accessories, and they would say, well, can you fix my audio system? I said, well, there's only one way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do all my own wiring. I said, I'm not going to trust any of your wiring. And one of the reasons I don't like to trust anyone's wiring is I had a friend that had a trailer in his shop. It was a camper trailer, and they were having problems with they kept blowing fuses and shorting things out. And he got into it where he had to start pulling panels apart, and he found out that some of the wires, they crimped other wires and spliced them in of different colors. So the wire started at the front, it was green, and at the back it was brown.
Geez.
And then in the middle it was white. And and it's just, what a nightmare. It's like, no wonder, you trust somebody else's wiring and you don't think they're going to change colors mid-ship, and they do.
I got a better one.
That's the worst.
I got a better one.
There's two words for that, though, if I could interject. Power probe.
Yeah.
That'll help you.
Wrap your head around this one here. Use one color wire for everything.
If you remember, I put a picture on Instagram, one of our tow trucks, our flatbed, there's this big bulkhead connector coming out of the firewall with about, 30, 40 wires, all purple. And it's just from the manufacturer. Like,
my international Scout's that way.
This is international. It is an international. It's like, probe the purple wire. They're all purple. Yeah.
It's all green.
Jeez, you got to be kidding me.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Yeah, I'm when I find a place that sells really good automotive grade wiring in different colors. I mean, I'm like a kid in a candy store. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Tori was saying that, and I'm just, I'll see that and I'm like, oh, they've got like 5 different gauges and they've got 12 different colors. And I go home with about $140 worth of wiring because I know at some point in my life I'm going to need that purple 14 gauge wire.
Michael, I'll agonize over stuff like that. Like what color am I going to use? I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as
there are conventions. I'll give you a case in point. I moved the coil in my car. I moved it to the other side of the engine because it just worked better. And I had to extend the tack wire. And the wire going into the car, I used a piece of a GM harness when I put it in, and it's a tan wire. So now I had to extend it about 8 inches, and I'm looking around like, I don't have any tan wire. I had to use white. I said, okay, I got to go to the next best thing. It was, I hated to do it, but I didn't have a choice. I wasn't going to use black or red, so I had to use a white. But you're right. Sometimes
you just use a white wire and you run too much current through it for a little while, and
it'll be tan. Yeah. It'll toast it. Right. Exactly. Brian, did you hear? I was talking about that tester that Matco came out with.
Right.
Do you have one of those on the truck? Do you have one of those?
I got 3 of them on the truck.
Tell us about it. What's the deal?
What a coincidence! There's 3 of us here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Brian, you got my address already, so
I sell a lot of them. I mean,
Brian's
a
got
lot
my
of guys
credit card
also
information.
like 'em because they'll test the actual. There's actually a bulb in the center, so it tests the cigarette lighter or the socket that you're using.
Right.
Because there's a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times I go in and they say this power probe doesn't work.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, where did you test it? Well, in the cigarette lighter. Well, does the cigarette lighter work?
Right.
I don't know. It should.
Right. Should.
Well, yeah, and a lot of OE lighters have they have diodes in them or
Right.
resistor wires in them too, and that's not the best place to test for 12 volts.
Right.
I learned that the hard way one time, and I had a cigarette lighter that failed and took it apart to figure out what's wrong with it, and I see all these little. I'm like, oh, so there, that's why I can't run my cooler through my cigarette plug lighter because the cooler's drawing too much current, and this thing's limited to not provide all that current. So I thought, oh, okay, but that's not the best place to test the circuit anyway.
Brian, what does that tool sell for, Brian? What's the price point on that thing?
That tool is like $38.
Oh,
That's
that's
a
not
steal.
bad at all.
I got to find something else to buy and add that to it because we're going to make a bundle on something. This way it pays to send it. Excellent tool. I actually, there's a place called Coon Trucking. They're down in Mississippi. I've been following these guys. I'm trying to get them on the show as well. This guy, Clay Coon, he does his tool reviews. There's a Snap-on review, a Macro review, and he has an independent guy. So he does a lot of tool stuff, and that's who I saw that from this week. So
Cool.
Excellent tool. I love it when companies, come out with new stuff like that addresses an issue that technicians have. He works on all big trucks, and he said, when I'm in the cab of a truck, we need power. This thing solved that problem for us.
Yeah, that's
Right.
pretty neat. That's very
But
cool.
a lot of that stuff's been around for a long time, and then of course, it comes back because you need to have that because there's no place to have a ground inside of a car now.
Right.
There's not a place, because it's all plastic.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah.
I had this is a true story, and this will be real quick. I had a guy that bought a test light, just a regular old light bulb test light. And he comes back to the truck. He says, this light doesn't work. And I was like, oh, well, maybe the bulb broke because of the vibration in the truck or whatever. So I put a new bulb in and hooked it up on the battery inside the truck. It works. I go in and he says, it's not working. There's something wrong with it. And I said, well, what do you have? Let me see. And this is on God honest truth. He had a wrench laying on the floor of the truck. I mean, on the floor of the car. He had the test light hooked to the wrench.
It's ground?
He was trying to test.
That was the ground point, was the wrench.
The ground point was the wrench.
Well, it's
Because
metal.
that's the only thing metal he could find in the car.
Oh, my God.
There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than replacing parts and finding out that you just didn't have a good solid connection to begin with, and you're replacing all these parts, and then you find out, oh, it's not grounded.
But that guy, I mean, like I said, that's what I see every day. It's like we love sausage, but we don't want to see how it's made.
Right.
Yeah,
There's a lot of shops I walk into that I will walk right back out and come back
like
about 10
Scrapple.
minutes later.
Yeah, but Tori, I tell you get the rice sausage with a little bit of onion and some peppers in the pan with the right amount of some olive oil. Oh, geez.
Well, Ray, again, your name ends in a vowel,
Yeah,
so we get that. The onion, the garlic, the olive oil, the fresh parsley. Well, they make eggs in it.
Yeah, I'm up for all that too. My name ends in a consonant. As a matter of fact, I got two vowels in my name, but they're just at different places, and
we'll let you slide.
Yeah,
it's okay.
I'm a food guy.
You're with us now.
We'll feed everybody. We can always add some water to the sauce. We'll take care of it. We feed everybody.
I'm from Maryland, so like we're
Brian.
talking about blue crab now.
Whereabouts in Maryland?
I grew up in Hyattsville and then lived in Silver Spring. Worked in Northwest DC for a while.
That's my area. That's my route. Downtown Silver Spring. I live in Spencerville, which is about 20 miles out or whatever.
How long you been around the Silver Spring area?
I've been in Silver Spring for as a distributor, I've been there for 19 years.
Okay.
But I've lived here for 32, 33 years.
Okay. So so you're familiar with White Oak?
Oh yeah.
Okay. My first job was a Shell station on the corner of New Hampshire Avenue at White Oak there, and then I worked at the Roy Rogers next door, my second job, and then
I love that place.
A deli that I loved working at down there, called Nosh and Nibble.
Sounds good.
It's a Jewish deli, and man, that was good food. And we had that's when you had adults working there, not kids, and the adults were cooking things like the roast beef and all that stuff. And we had
collared shirts with white aprons, right? Like the German guys.
And
that's the Shell station. They're tearing that down right now.
Really? Oh, see, I worked there when they only had 2 digits and gasoline went over $1 and we had to sell it by the half gallon, and then it was like, now I know why they have me do math in school, But yeah, I was in Hyattsville for most of my life. I went to Silver Spring, moved there for about my 12th grade, and I lived there for a little while. And then I went into the Air Force and ended up going all over the place. But I'm still a Maryland guy. I'm out here in California, but I don't claim it.
I'll have to send you some crabs.
I'm talking with some of my friends. I've got a couple of friends that grew up out there. And, one of them, it's funny, my neighbor across the street, I found out that he loves blue crab too. He says, I found a place to get it. I said, yeah. And he says, yeah, it's called a Brecky's. I go, yeah, I know. It's they ship it out overnight. I go, oh, yeah, but
it's always funny when we go someplace and they'll have like Maryland blue crab, on the menu.
Right.
And the guy will say, oh, the crabs are excellent. And they say, where are you guys from? And we say, oh, Maryland. Oh, don't have the crabs.
Yeah. Funny story about that. My girlfriend a bunch of years ago, she found this restaurant down in San Diego called the Blue Crab. And we go there and I ordered the crab and it's like you get 6. And I'm like, really? That's like an appetizer. Mm-hmm. And they bring them out and the crabs are sitting there and they crack them and clean them and give you like a lump crab meat in there. And when I say lump crab meat, I don't mean like Timbuktus. I mean,
Timbuktu.
Yeah, they just clack and clean it, and then you get there and they pull the shell off, and I'm like, this is no fun. So later she found this restaurant that does blue crab feast, and it's no longer there, but it was down by Horton Plaza in San Diego. So we go there, and before we walk in, I'm talking to the 2 people at the door, and I go, okay, who owns this place? And this guy says, I do. I said, where are you from? He said, Severn. I said, have you been in the restaurant business? And he says, yeah, my family's been in the business for a long time. He says, let me guess, you're disappointed with the blue crab down there by the airport. And I said, yeah. He said, you're not going to be disappointed. Nice. So we went in there and we loved it. And he would do a blue crab feast. And this was back in the 90s. And it was like $39 all you could eat. Wow. So I told a couple of friends from work, I said, man, you got to go to this place. They have a crab feast.
Challenge accepted.
And the waitress comes over and she's got all the utensils and everything, and she says, so do you need instructions on how to do this? And my friend's brother says, he looks up a real serious face. He goes, we're professionals. Don't even joke with us.
Yeah, Timbuktu just sold. They just sold to this other guy, and man, we were all like, I hope he doesn't change anything because
I know
Timbuktu is awesome. Same with G&M.
Well, one of my favorite things, my grandmother lived out in Hammond Village out in Laurel up to 29, and I would go out there, and she had her brothers, they lived out in Annapolis, so they always had their crab pots and everything, and so I'd go out there to visit her when I could, and it got to be like every year I'd go out there for 2 weeks, and the very first day I fly in, get there usually in the evening, and the very next day I go out to bottom of the bay, the liquor stores out in Laurel, and I'd get 2-3 dozen crab, and all the liquor stores, people out here, you tell them, that's like, yeah, there's a big sign on the liquor store window said, yes, we have crabs, and I said, yeah, because they all steam crabs in the back, So that's what we all did. We go buy a case of beer and we get a couple dozen crabs. So God love my grandmother. One year she says to me, and she was about 90, 91, 92. She says, you know why I like when you come out here? And I said, why is that, Grammy? And she says, you're the only one that gets me blue crab. Nobody buys me blue crab. And I said, that's the only reason? She says, well, you're okay. And I thought, thanks. I don't like blue crab. But, I'd get it and I'd come out there and she'd have newspaper on the table, a couple of beers out, and I'd sit there and eat blue crab and drink beer with Grandma.
And she says, you get me blue crabs and you understand the importance of a good ground. And that's what I like.
Yeah. Yeah, we would ground.
Yeah, this guy's all right.
Yeah. Great stuff.
I am to please with guests.
Well, I'll tell you, Tori, when I come out there and visit you guys, then I'm going to expect a hell of a meal from you.
Oh, see, I have a problem with that. I'm going to tell you why. You better spend a week. I don't know where to take you because there's so many places to go to. Right. These guys talking about crabs? Okay, check this out. Randazzo's in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Soft shell crab.
Yeah.
Don't need I say anything else.
My older daughter's a big soft shell crab fan. Myself, I like king crabs. Me too. I'm a king crab leg. We go to Popeyes in Bethpage for that.
Yeah. Sorry, so Michael, it's 2 nights. How many nights you staying?
Well, let's see. I think if I'm coming all the way out there, I'm gonna help Lou work on your car. So if I'm coming out there, I'm probably gonna come out there for about a week. We're gonna eat good. I'm gonna come back fatter than I am now.
This is what I'll do. Okay, and I do this for Lou too. I'll go to the Italian place by me. Okay, it's named Firsty's. They're from Ozone Park. They're out by me on Long Island now. I'll fill a cooler up with fresh pasta. I'll pack it nice and bring it down here.
Nice.
So we can make that happen. That's easy. That's real simple.
John's coming up there too, he says.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I don't know how he went from cooling systems to food, but I'm okay with it.
That's how it happens.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you guys, we're going to get knocked off at 11 o'clock. So any closing thoughts, we should probably get them in the next couple of minutes or so because they're just going to cold kill us. So
I know. I'm hungry too. I got to go eat dinner, but I'm still 7:45 out here in California. One of the things we're talking about electrical, and this is something I'll tell you a real quick story. We had a guy, we were talking earlier about how you have all these accessories and you run out of ports to put all these temperature senders in. If you got EFI and your gauge and everything else. We sell a relay kit that has a temperature sender. And you have to use that when you're using a relay system like ours for cooling fans because it's an on-off switch. It's not a variable resistor. And we had this guy that it was kind of funny, but he ran out of ports. So he basically took, we have a wire that needs to get a ground signal from your engine. Now with our sender, once the temperature reaches 185, it produces a ground signal and that trips the relay to turn on your fans.
Wire.
Have an extra port, so he took that wire and he hooked it up to his sender for his gauge. Well, what does electricity do? It finds the path of least resistance. The least resistance, even though that relay is only about a less than an amp draw, his gauge is even less. So what happened is when it saw that wire that went to the relay. And as the temperature started rising, well, now it's a ground and it's pegging his gauge. So first thing he says is, well, my temperature got up to about 220 degrees and the fan never came on and I shut it off because I didn't want to boil over. And I said, well, you probably didn't get to 220 degrees and the fans didn't come on because you're not using our sender. But that's a good point to bring up to everybody is that when you're using a sender for a relay system, make sure that you use the sender that comes with your relay kit because that is a completely different type of sender than what you use to read your gauge.
The other thing
when you get up to 240 degrees, it's basically pegging, which means it's a full connection to ground.
The other thing that you mentioned in the video, which is great that people they always screw it up, is not to use thread sealer on that that sender and the fitting, the brass fitting into the intake manifold, because it needs to ground, not to be insulated.
You mess up the ground signal. Now, if you use something like Dakota Digital has a 2-wire sender, and their senders, they provide a little thread sealer on there, and that's totally fine. But because you're going to take one wire is going to go to ground, the other is going to get the signal. But a single wire sender like that, absolutely. We've had guys that say, well, I had to put some thread sealer. And I go, well, you just lost your ground, or you're not getting a good ground signal. And they say, well, what if it starts to leak? It's like, well, put a wrench on it, give yourself another 1/8 of a turn. It's a tapered fitting. It's going to, you don't want to get a breaker bar out there and put 200 pounds on it. But I just tell people, get it tight with your hand, as tight as you can. Get a wrench, do a couple of circles with a wrench, get it tight, get it up to temperature. If you start to see a little droplet of coolant come out, give it about 1/8 of a turn, maybe 1/4 of a turn, and let the thread seal it, and it'll be just fine.
What about the argument with dissimilar metals?
It's brass and aluminum. If I can address that, one of the things I did, I wanted to mention it earlier, but I didn't have a chance. I kept the copper core radiator in my car. I had my buddy at the radiator shop rebuild it for me. And I do have an aluminum intake manifold. What we did is put a zinc anode in the bottom tank of the radiator. And what that does is that sacrifices itself a lot like on a boat. Use a zinc anode. So that zinc anode is going to sacrifice itself to any electrolysis that's in the system, which in my case should be small, because I've seen aluminum intake manifolds be eaten. And aluminum manifolds and heads just get eaten by electrolysis through the coolant.
I've seen that too, yeah.
So by using that zinc anode, that becomes like your fusible link in the system.
Right. Good idea.
Anybody that's worked with stainless steel bolts have probably had them lock up, and you're like, okay, well, I put this on by hand, and now I need an arc welder to torch it off.
Yeah.
So you can use anti-seize. I think anti-seize is not going to mess with your conductivity, but a brass sender and aluminum intake, I don't think you're going to have much of a problem with that. We do have people that have asked us about electrolysis, and I've had maybe 2 or 3 people ask about it because they've had a problem. In all the years that I've ever worked on cars and done my own systems, I've never had an issue with electrolysis. And it's just make sure everything's clean. Make sure all your connections are clean. Where you're going to get some electrolysis when you have some bad connections. That's what's going to cause a lot of problems. Just make sure if you're going to use an intake for a ground, make sure it's a good solid connection. One
of the things we say on our show all the time is we want to make a T-shirt that says, "What part of a bad ground don't you understand?" We say that all the time. And this is a little trick I've been doing since the 70s with people. I tell them, you wouldn't think. I'm sure you don't think your cooling system conducts electricity. No. Yeah, and I'm sure you don't think your radiator hose would conduct electricity. Well, no, it's rubber. How could it? I bet guys gone out in the parking lot with a fluke meter.
Right.
Ground the meter to the battery and put the positive lead on the upper radiator hose, and you'll see a couple. It varies from double digits to a couple hundred millivolts of current. And they're like, how is that? I'm like, well, because you got a bad ground somewhere, and you have electrolysis happening in your system, and that coolant is conducting, and it's seeping through your hose.
Exactly. And current, like I mentioned earlier, current will find the path of least resistance, and you got a bad wiring, and it's amazing what happens when you got a bad ground or you got a weak system, and where your current tries to find the path of least resistance, it'll find it through something else. And
shifter cables or heater cables.
Oh,
I mean,
on
German cars, we had a big problem with heater core cables in the old days. I mean, when I worked on them, and like I said, you get a heater core cable. I mean, they say the heat won't work, and you open it up, and the cables just melted. Why did that happen? Because you took a ground off somewhere. So
exactly. Yeah, that happened with the F bodies through the 70s. The shifters would get tight. The automatic shifter would get tight to move, and people they're changing if you change the cable, it would solve it for a while, but it'll come back. And usually it was almost always a bad ground, and that cable conducts electricity fantastically. It works as a great ground, and that's what it was. And then the other part of it is, which falls into dissimilar metals, when you pass current through a cable, it's not supposed to pass current. It's not rated for that. That's a cable. It's not wire like copper wire. it gets brittle, and that's how it, it just stiffens up like crazy. So
absolutely.
Yeah, all that crazy stuff.
Okay, well, there's that awkward moment of silence.
Well, we have about less than 5 minutes left to go. So,
well, this has been fun. I mean, I know this went longer, and I enjoyed talking to you guys. I appreciate you having me on, Tori.
We'll do it again.
Great meeting you.
Count on it.
Yeah, it's a blast, and it's one of the things I miss. A bunch of old gearheads just sitting back talking about shit we went through past 45 years, 50 years. It's fun.
But, the more that
it was really nice talking to you guys.
The more we do that,
Brian, good seeing you, Brian.
I can't reiterate it more. The more we do that, the more it cements in my mind the reason we're the brain trusts. And I'm not saying that I'm actually smart, but just to pass stuff on, pay it forward and pass it on to younger guys or girls, and just show them things that we take for granted, because they're going to say, "Oh wow, I didn't know that."
And here's great advice for the young people. When you're talking with young people and you're teaching them something, this is something that I've used with people a lot of times, because I'll post something as a discovery thing for somebody that's younger, and some clown will always come in and say, "Oh, everybody knows that." I'm like, you know what? None of us were born with the knowledge.
Right.
Everybody had to learn at some point. So to act so pompous and arrogant, like, "Oh, I've known that all along," guess what? You had to learn it at some point. Even if you learned it at 4, you had to learn it at some point. So
that's right.
I tell the young kids that are trying to learn, I say, don't let these guys intimidate you, because at some point in their life, they didn't know either.
Right.
And
Michael,
I'm still learning. I love it.
Oh yeah. Mike, do us a favor. Throw out any contact information you have that people may want to, how you want them to get in touch with you, social media addresses or whatnot.
Yeah. We're, our Facebook page is Champion Cooling. You'll find us there. Our website, championcooling.com. Instagram and Twitter, I think it's just Champion Cooling, or I think one of them is Champion Cooling Systems. But we're primarily on Facebook. Go there, like our page. We put up a lot of neat stuff. We put some educational stuff. And, if you have any questions, you need some custom work, just reach out to us. There you go, championcooling.com. Our phone numbers are on our page. Right. And custom work we can do. We have about 15,000 applications. We keep about 25,000 radiators in our inventory. And look forward to anybody that you want to step up to an aluminum radiator. Love to have you part of our family.
I'm going to look you up on Instagram myself and start following you. So we'll.
Great.
With that, I guess, guys, we're going to go. If you want, we should do some closing. Mike, we just heard from you. Brian, tell everybody who you are. How do you find you?
I'm Brian. I'm Hey Maco Man. You can follow me on Instagram at Hey Maco Man, or Facebook is also Hey Maco Man. And like I said, I can help you with any of your tool needs. I'm willing to give a hand any way I can possibly do.
Right.
I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Tori?
Awesome.
Hey, Michael, it was great hanging out with you. We got to do this again real soon. Just a little teaser for next week. We have Doug Evans, the president of Crowell Cams, as our guest next week on Playing Traffic. And again, I'd like to thank everybody who had a helping hand with my project. A couple people I forgot, PSI, and of course Nelson Gills at ACC Performance. But have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next week, and I'll talk to you later.
I thought, you said that. I thought you meant Evans drum heads, because I'm looking for some for some skins. But anyway, I'm Rick Guarino, filling in for Lewis Lee tonight. MotorMouthRadio.com, or on Twitter at the same address, and real_MotorMouthRadio on Instagram. And we'll be back again next week. And Tori, you're doing a great job. Thanks for the great guests.
I love what I do.
Great making some new friends here. I really enjoyed it. And, anytime we can help you out, just give me a holler.
I sure will.
And I'm just Michael at championcooling.com is my email. So you can reach me that way.
All right, fellas.
All right, guys.
See you all next week.
Everybody. See you next week. Take care.
So long.
Good night.
Just give me a call, Ray.
We'll do, Brian. Absolutely.
Hey, guys.
Nice talking to you, Michael.
You too, Brian.
Great seeing you. All right.